All right. Well, welcome in, folks. Grab a virtual seat and we'll get started. So, hello, everybody, and welcome to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Earhart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition, our 276th being recorded on. Oops, so hold on. I inadvertently have my browser. That's a negative. That was the delay I was telling Adam about. We need to have YouTube open for him if he wants to put in comments, and I had it open just to look at something, and I heard the echo. So it's about 10 seconds delayed. So apologies. So like I said, 276th episode being recorded on Thursday, November 12th, 2020 at 6 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, and we do have Adam Tuttle, who's going to be presenting on Taffy and more, REST API live coding, and Fireside chat. So Adam, thanks for coming on, and take it away.
Well, Charlie, thanks for having me. I'm sorry, no fire here in my office, but we'll do the best we can. It's just meant to evoke a relaxed atmosphere.
Amen.
So as Charlie said, my name is Adam Tuttle. I am I guess you could say, a full stack developer living outside of Philadelphia. And a little over 10 years ago now, I wrote the framework that we're going to be discussing today called Taffy for authoring REST APIs. And it's got quite the following. So thought it would be fun to just talk about it and see where it's at now 10 years later. So as you can see here, this is my blog. The address or the URL is adamtuttle.codes. That's Tuttle. And so I write about all kinds of technology stuff there. And I also wrote a book about REST. It's called Rest Assured. The URL for that is restassuredbook.com. And if you like what I have to say here tonight, but maybe you want more detail, because I don't plan on going super deep through here, then I'd say the book would be a good next stop for you. It goes pretty deep on all the fundamentals of REST and good API design practices. So that's a good thing to have. And if you stick around to the end of the show, then I will give out a discount code. So you can get, I think, 15% off. So we'll do that. And so that kind of brings me to the little bit of code that I've prepared for today. And that's just to give me something to have a good functional baseline to start doing some live coding. So this is up on my GitHub. It's github.com/atuttle/API-demo. And basically, there's a makefile in here that I'm going to use to control a bunch of things. There's some Docker containers defined in my Docker compose file. And that's going to be our database and a Lucy instance, and then a database administration tool just to make it easy to administer the data. Imagine that. And this password.txt is for, I believe that's for Lucy, for the Lucy administrator. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. And then we have a www folder in there with just some basic stuff so that I can be sure that Lucy is set up and running correctly and connected to the database as we get started here. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, which leaves me with an empty tab. I'm just going to set that off to the side, and that brings up my editor here. So this is the same code. I have that repo checked out locally, and I'm just going to do make up. And while that's running, I'll show you what that's doing. So that's running Docker Compose up, which is going to start my Docker containers. And then once that's done, it's going to open localhost 4040 in my browser. Oh no, I think, let me know if you lose my camera, Charlie. It just made a noise. So that,
we still see.
Okay, good. That started up the Docker containers. You can see down here, started up the demo database, my CFML container, and the database administrator tool. Opened up the little website here. So it shows me the current time and just runs a quick query against the database. And so we know Lucy is functional and we're good to go. Cool. So the next thing that I'm going to need to do, so this is my www folder. In order to use Taffy, I have to install it. So I did another makefile target to download and install Taffy for us. It just downloads it from GitHub and drops it in the www folder. And that's good to go. And then we need to create our API folder. So I'm going to create a folder in here called API. And in there, we need a couple of things. We're going to do a new file called application.cfc because that's a Taffy specific requirement. And also I need a new file called index.cfm. Index.cfm is going to be blank. I could put whatever I want in here, and that's not going to matter one bit because it just has to exist for routing reasons and never actually gets executed. So I said Taffy requires you to have an application CFC, and it's got very, very few requirements on how you structure your application, but there are a few, so let's go through them. So it obviously is a component, and it's going to extends Taffy core API, and it's going to inherit a bunch of functionality from that. And if you're familiar with Framework 1, among other tools and frameworks that I drew inspiration from, this approach of having base classes for inheriting functionality. I stole that from Framework 1, so thank you, Sean.
Hey, Adam, before you go on,
yeah,
just in case others watching might be wondering these questions, you're showing using Lucy.
yes.
Is there? I know that Taffy works with ColdFusion, but would you say there's going to be things that you'll do today which might only work in Lucy, or had you perhaps already kind of discerned that the things you're going to show would work the same way in ColdFusion?
Well, so I'll say this. I have almost no plan whatsoever. I have a little bit of data, and I'm going to show basically how to do some CRUD operations, but there are a very few differences between some of the things that Lucy supports and Adobe ColdFusion supports, and I'll point those out when we get there.
Oh, there you go. That'd be great.
Thank you.
And then as far as you're showing Docker, I
Mhm.
assume you're using either the Lucy Docker images or the Ortus command box Lucy Docker image.
Yep. So for the Lucy image, I'm using Lucy's,
yeah.
and then MySQL for my database, and that's it. I can pull up the Docker Compose file here real quick. Let's make that just a touch smaller.
But while you're doing that, I just wanted to throw out for those who don't know, there is ColdFusion Docker images, both from Ortus command box, both ColdFusion and Lucy images, and then from Adobe, they have ColdFusion images, including for 2021, and which just came out yesterday for those that maybe didn't hear, and then for 2018 and 2016.
Yep. I'm just sticking with what I do every day, sure. That's why I
and that one more thing about that, when you showed using Make, that may also be foreign to some people who haven't worked with that.
Right.
But your site and the book would both talk about doing things, just so we don't lose anybody. They would talk about setting things up and doing things just more vanilla, no Docker, no
Correct.
Make, right? Just want to clarify that.
Yeah. So there are some guides and some getting started materials on my blog and on the Taffy website, which is taffy.io, or in the documentations, which is docs, if I can type, taffy.io. So if you jump into just like the latest version, there is a quick start and getting started in more detail, talks about folder structure and different installation options, with a global mapping or in subfolder of your application, or putting Taffy in your web root like I have here.
Yep.
So
perfect. Just wanted everybody to understand that, so they didn't feel like they'd be lost.
Docker's not a requirement, and it'll work on any CFML engine that's still relevant, I should say. I doubt it'll work on, was it the Smith project or old bluedragon.net sort of thing.
Right.
So our Docker file, we have a demo database, which is using MySQL. Just exposing the port to my host machine. It is saving the data in this DB data folder. That's pretty much all that's relevant there. This adminer thing is it's a PHP tool, but it's easy to use and whatever. Who cares? It's in a Docker container for doing database administration, sort of like a PHP MySQL admin, I think is what it was called, but this is a little bit simpler. And then we have our CFML container, which just has a name. It's the Lucy image. I'm mapping in that local www folder as var www in the container. And then, so this password.txt sets the Lucy admin password, which I guess is a relatively recent development that it's no longer set by default. you have to set one on the server. So I had to map that in. And then I'm exposing, so it normally starts up on port 8888, and I'm exposing that as 4040 because I use 8888 often locally. So yeah, so that's what my makeup did, was I just started those Docker containers. So we're here in our application CFC in our API folder, and I just created a component extending the taffy.core.api class, and I'm just going to do this.name equals, I don't know, demo API, sure, whatever. And technically, if you really want to be like pedantic about it, this I would say counts as an API. We have a working API here, just can't do anything. So if I do localhost 4040, and then we'll do API. So you can see Taffy is running here. Bump font size down just a little bit. So this is a feature of Taffy that we're looking at now called the API dashboard. Shows you what resources you have defined, tries to give you some helpful hints. If there are syntax errors or something like that in your resources, it will point those things out for you, tries to give you some helpful information, warns me that I'm using the framework default reload key and password, and recommends changing them in production. That's a link to the documentation, and some other things that will become clear as we start to use this. So I'm going to set that a little bit off to the side right now, and let's go ahead and create some resources. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to create it in the resources folder. And let's do author collection.cfc. So I created resources author collection.cfc. So one thing that I'll probably talk a little bit about here is the difference between collections and members. So with a REST API, I would say, in my opinion, the URL is like at least 50% of what matters. Meaning that the URL that the end user sees and how your data appears to be organized. So one of the things that Taffy does to enable you to have a lot of control over that URL is some of the component level metadata on your resources. And one of the ways that I like to organize my data is I separate things into collections and members. So a collection is like what it sounds. It's a collection of things, multiple rows. So if you say, give me all of the authors, you're going to get a collection of authors. Or if I want author number 4, I'm going to get one record just in a detail view. And that, I don't know if I said that, it comes from the member. And so that there's just a little bit of a distinction that way, because, and the reason that that's separated is because you treat them a little bit differently in the code. So by the framework expecting you to segregate them a little bit, then it makes your code a little bit more compact and cleaner. You have a few more objects, but the code within them stays well separated, sort of a separation of concerns type thing. Cool. So this is our author collection. Again, it's a component. I don't know why it adds that blank line. And just like the other one, we're going to do extends, but instead of Taffy Core API, this time we're going to do Taffy Core Resource. And then we have another metadata attribute to add here, and that's going to be Taffy URI. And this can be authors. Or I can make it whatever I want, really, but we'll start with authors. And as Charlie mentioned earlier, this is one of those places where Lucy and Adobe ColdFusion can optionally diverge. So when I originally wrote the framework, I was only testing against Adobe ColdFusion, and based on some experience I'd had writing Flex code, and in particular, I think the framework I liked was Swizz. A lot of the metadata that they used was this colon format, so like Taffy colon URI equals whatever. And that works fine in Adobe ColdFusion, but Lucy doesn't like it. So Taffy supports either. And if you're on Lucy, then you have to use the underscore version. And then I just put in whatever I want my path to be here. And then my method name. So I have to declare some methods in this component, right? So I'm going to do a function. I'll explain why in a second later, but I'm going to call it get for now. And let's add some things as we go here. So let's do a hint here. And we say this is the method documentation. And I'm going to add a hint up here as well. Hint this is the component documentation. Cool. And then, you know what, let's add an argument as well. So maybe like a filter. Let's make it an optional string and default it to empty string and do hint equals this is the argument documentation. All right, that's my function. Cool. So now our function has to do something, right? So let's just for now, let's just return representation of an empty object, or let's do hello world, semicolon, save. Cool. So if I come over here and I refresh, nothing happens. And that is because Taffy caches your API resources to help it be fast. And that is why we see this reload API cache button up at the top. So if I hit that, it's going to actually reload my API cache as an AJAX request, in part so that if you're doing something in the dashboard, which will be more obvious what that is here in a minute, then you don't lose your work, because sometimes you want to just fix a bug in your code without changing the test that you're running in the dashboard. And so you can reload the API without doing that in a new tab or without losing what you've got going on there. So I reloaded. I can do it again real quick. This pops up this green message, API cache cleared successfully. And then if I refresh the page again, oh, yay. What was that? I ran into this yesterday when I was preparing. I know. What was that problem? You know, let's do make down, make up. And while that's running, I'm going to look at my cheater reference here. Did I... Of course. And I should have known, right? Live coding. This was going to happen. It was bound to happen. Let's see. Tuttle stack trace. This is like exactly what happened to me yesterday. Why can't I remember what the fix was? This is frustrating. Let me make sure that my Docker container has the volume. It does. Docker exec. And demo cfml. Bin bash. Oh, you know what? I just remembered. Ha, cool. I figured it out. So one of the things that's necessary in our, this is, I think, also a Lucy difference, or at least in the way that I'm using my Lucy container here, I need to have these mappings defined. And we'll come back for the data source later. But so in my API, if I define these mappings, so for Taffy, so that I can find my Taffy stuff, and then that resources folder that I created, that's going to be in the same path inside the www folder. I bet you, if I go back now and reload and refresh, yay, cool, I fixed it. Live coding win. I was this close to saying, you know what, we'll just do it without the running examples and we'll just talk about it through the code. But we did it. Okay, cool. So this is the dashboard now that I've defined a resource. So my resource is that author collection CFC. I've defined a function named get. It takes one argument named filter, and it returns an object with a key in it named hello with value of world. So this is just like a little panel thing. I can click on that. I guess let's talk briefly about HTTP verbs. So you're probably familiar with get and post. if I'm sure many of you are already familiar with much of this, but if you weren't already, in addition to get and post, which you're probably familiar with from doing form submits in regular HTML forms, those are HTTP verbs, and in addition to those, HTTP also supports put, patch, delete, and a few other standard ones, as well as, if I remember correctly, you can actually make up your own, but I would not recommend that. But because I wrote a method named get, Taffy will automatically map any get requests to this resource, to this function. So one of the nice things that we're going to see here is that Taffy tries to do as much of the work for you as possible. Very, very little boilerplate. Much of this is just you writing what's going to happen in your code. So I've expanded my author's resource here. I know I can do a get request, and if there were any other supported methods, I would be able to select it there. That's the URI that it's going to run. Let me make this a little bit bigger just so we see. So this is sort of, this is it at its normal size, but I've got it increased for you guys. So there's some documentation that gets included on the dashboard for you. So remember, we have the component documentation. This was the hint on the component. This is where we saw the hint on the method, and then I can add hints on my arguments as well. And all of that pops into your dashboard. So if you've got this, for example, the way that we use this in my company is we leave the dashboard visible on our QA environments, and we invite our customers to use the QA environment. And so they can see all of the documentation for the API right there. And then in production, we turn the dashboard off. But if I need more room to do my work, I can hide the docs or show them. And then I can add query string parameters. So we know that we defined that optional filter. So if I do filter and say foo, then we can see that pops in up here. So we've got like authors !, filter = foo. And so if I send that off, then it runs the HTTP request as an AJAX request in this case. And these are the headers that come back in that request. So these X time in headers, these are telling you how long different phases of Taffy's handlers took to run, and these are in milliseconds. So it took 12 milliseconds to parse my request, 4 milliseconds in all of the other areas of Taffy that are not otherwise represented in this code or in these headers. And then we got our response, which has a 200 status code, 200 success. The whole thing took 41 milliseconds. And we got this JSON object back, hello world. One thing I want to point out here is that this returned JSON, but I've returned in my method here, I just returned a native ColdFusion object. And so by default, what Taffy is doing here is converting that to JSON for me. And that is the default because that is probably what 90 to 99% of people want most of the time. Cool. So let's do something a little bit more involved. Let's start changing things up. I guess maybe before I make it more complicated, are there any questions yet that I should address? I see lots of comments here. This is great.
I think the only outstanding question was one earlier where somebody had asked, and I was not watching at the moment, so I couldn't tell what they were referring to. Did you have something that was called adminer? ADMNIER?
Yes. So
and
that's
is there a CFML version of it?
No, there's not. I mean, there very well could be, but if there is, I'm not aware of it. What it is, here, I'll pull it up for you. So if I just do, I'm still in my Docker container here. So if I do make adminer, so that's just going to pull this up. And this is just if you're familiar with like PHP myadmin or something, guest, and I think we can just log in without the, yep. So this is just a quick like a web-based database administrator thing. So like blog is the database that we're working on, and these are my tables. There's that author table that I just said. There's the data that's in it, that sort of thing. So you can, I can import a SQL file to set up the database or export it from here. You can make table alterations or create them, etc. That's all that the adminer thing is. Cool. Okay, so let's move on then. So we don't need that up either. Cool. So I guess a couple of things here. Let's see. So quick note, so this representation of method, that's kind of tedious to type, so we just made it rep. You can use either, but there's an alias for that. And then the other pretty neat thing here is you can chain methods in your response. So let's say we're going to return a representation of this object, but we're going to change the status code. So with status 202, because why not? So that's the status code numeric, and then I can also provide a status message. And then if I wanted to, I can do .with headers, and that expects an object. And let's just do x CF Meetup is now. I'm going to save that. And again, just to illustrate the caching thing, if I hit send again, none of my changes take place. The header I added isn't here. My status code is still 200, but if I reload the API cache, and now I haven't lost like my filter equals foo because that was done over an AJAX request, and I hit send, now we get 202 and my XCF Meetup header was added. All right, so that's so the method chaining stuff that's available. Let's, instead of just doing placeholder data, let's actually load some data out of our database. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to pull the data source out of, we can pull it out of here. So I've got this DSN. So Lucy, I apologize, I'm not up to speed on the more recent versions of Adobe ColdFusion. I've been on Lucy for a while, but I know that in Lucy, you can specify the code for a data source in like this.data sources in your application CFC. So that's all that this is doing, is defining it. I'm saying DemoDB is my Docker container, blog is the name of the database, this is the password, which is guest, and that's the user it's connecting to the database with. So I'm just importing that as a single line just to help keep this clean. So now that I've got my data source defined, let's get some data. So I'm going to do var data equals query execute, select, so this is the collection. So let's just get everything from our author. Select star from author, I think it was author singular. And instead of hello world, we're going to return our data, and we'll just get rid of this stuff because that's just taking up space. All right. So again, let's reload. Oh, reload failed. What's the problem? Application. Oh, I didn't copy it in. Let's actually, we'll just pull it in from level up. There we go. Reload and send this request off. And now we get the traditional kind of icky database result set serialization. So one of the things that's built into Taffy in this Taffy core resource base class is a tool or a method that you can use that is called query to array, which will take a query object and return it as an array of objects. And if you want, we can do this. Let's do select ID as ID. Just I'm gonna illustrate the and name as NAME. It preserves case, right? So instead of like often you would see the object keys become uppercased, this will this query to array preserves the case as you select it in your SQL statement. And then, as I was saying, we can do a callback here. So let's do function, if I can type function, and give it a callback. And let's, and then it receives a row. We can call it whatever we want. I can call it Adam. And as long as I return that same Adam or a new one, whatever, at the end, then I can do whatever I want in here. So we can do, for example, Adam foo equal bar. And that'll happen for every row. This callback gets called for every row in our data set here. So again, let's reload our API cache and send the request. And now we can see our columns maintain that case that I selected them with. And it didn't, I'll have to look into that. It's supposed to add that data to that. That's interesting. Maybe that's a bug. We'll see. Anyway, let's try this. We'll just do select ID name from author, and we'll do Adam.name equals viewcase Adam.name. Try that one more time. We're returning Adam. That seems like it should work. And it doesn't. Very curious. Okay, well, I'll log that as a bug. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So now it's connected to our database. It's looking up data. We can see that because this is our collection and I'm returning multiple rows here, right? I did my query to array, but my query is potentially a set of multiple rows. It just so happens that there's only one row in this table right now. We're getting back an array, and then in that array is our objects with our name and ID. So that's sort of the basics of how you wire up an API with database access. I guess let's talk briefly about when you would want to use different methods. I think some of them are pretty obvious, right? Like you probably know you should use a delete when you want to delete some data, right? But when would you use post, put, or patch? What's the difference between post and put and patch, and when would you use one or the other? So generally, the get verb is considered safe because it should, in theory, according to the standards or convention, it should never make a change in the database. And a get is just like when I go to google.com, right? That is a get request to Google's server. A post is like when you're doing a form post and you're inserting data into the database, or potentially you might have used it for updating. You probably have used it for updating data in a database. When we're specifically speaking about REST APIs, generally one of the things that you'll say, one of the rules of thumb, is that a post is for inserting data and a put is for updating that data or any data. Of course, there's an exception to everything. The exception would be a put is fine for an insert if you are also specifying like the primary key value. So if you have, like, for example, a natural key, if the email address is the user ID sort of thing, then you're specifying what that ID value is when you insert it. So you would insert it using a put in that case. Well, how do you create those handlers for those different verbs? You do it with more functions here. So if we do function put, and I don't have to really implement anything, I can just come back over here, reload, and refresh, and now put is lit up, and I could do a put here. And if I put some arguments here, so let's just say foo1, foo2, foo3, then Taffy's going to know that they exist, and when somebody goes in the dashboard to use a put, it's going to suggest that they pass those three values. Oops, bumped my keyboard. So that's sort of the basics of putting together your API. Like I said, you would use a delete to make deletes, post to insert, put to update. Patch is when you would want to do an update, but the difference between put and patch is generally with a put, you would send the entire record with whatever updates already applied to it. And with a patch, for example, if this was my record and I only wanted to update foo2, then I could do a patch with just these things, and it would not assume that because the other keys are missing that they should be blank. It would only see, okay, I've passed foo2, so I should update the foo2 property in my database for this ID or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've got our author collection. I guess let's create our author member. So let's do a new file, author member. And again, we need a component, extends Taffy core resource, Taffy URI. So this time we're going to do author, what was it, author or authors? It was authors. And we need something in the URL to indicate that we're going to have some sort of an ID value here. So we'll do author ID. And that's what these curly brackets mean to Taffy. It sees those and says, okay, I'm looking for something to appear here. And whatever I see, I'm going to capture that value and I'm going to pass it to your handler function. And when you get a really complicated API, sometimes you'll have, other things in here and multiple tokens, and that's totally fine. Taffy will see all those things, and if it matches, if a request comes in that matches this path, then author ID would be pulled out and passed as an argument, and this would be pulled out and passed as an argument to your handler. But for this case, we're just going to do this. So we're going to do function. Let's start with our get, and we need our author ID, and that is going to be populated by whatever gets passed in the URL. So we'll get author ID. We'll go ahead and make it required numeric author ID. And we'll do var author details equals query execute select star, which I know is terrible behavior, I'm sorry, from author where ID equals ID, and I'm going to use parameters because that's a good practice. My ID parameter is a CF SQL numeric value. It's going to be arguments author ID. Okay, so that's my author details, and now there's a couple of different ways you could do it. In addition to query to array, Taffy also has query destruct. So let's see, it should be return rep query to struct and author details. And I think it assumes, it's been a long time since I've used this method. I think I usually end up just doing query to array, and then so that's going to return an array, and then I just want the first item from that array, just because it's muscle memory for me. But let's give it a try. Query to struct. And so now if we come back over here, we'll reload and refresh. So now we have our author's author ID. And this new section pops into the dashboard here, lets me specify my author ID without having to type that out there. So I'll just say author ID 1 and hit send. And now we get back, hey, it worked. Cool. I did something right. We get back my name and ID for that particular row that was requested. And if I do, let's go ahead and say author ID is a bunch of numbers. And if I hit send, I get nothing back because it's up to me, the developer, to implement something to check that, right? So if we get, so if author details dot record count equals 0, then I want to return no data, actually no content would be better, with status 404. So now if I reload and send, now we get a 404 with an empty request or response body. Hopefully that's making sense for everybody. So that was our get, and this would be the appropriate place if we wanted to support modifying an author through this API. This would be an appropriate place to define our put and even a post to insert. So a function post, and let's just have required numeric ID and required string name. And let's do a put as well. And actually, so these are going to get author ID as well. So actually, for that reason, I'm going to put my post in the author collection. I'll get rid of the put here for now. So this, in my opinion, the author collection is the place to put the post, because in the author member, that is specific to this URL. And we don't know the author ID yet because we're just going to insert and let the database set that ID. So that's why over in my author collection, I'll have my post. And actually, we really just want the name. So we're going to do, let's see, var, actually, var, whatever, let's just start with the easy part. Query, execute, insert into author, and we want the name, and we're going to do values, name. Name is going to be type varchar. Value is going to be arguments dot name. Okay, and then let's see. That's right. You don't need to do something special for that, right? So it's been a while since I've done this. Let's see. Var. No, I guess you do. So our result, is that what it is? Is going to be, let's just do var insert result. Insert result. And then let's return object with name of arguments, name and ID of insert result dot generated key, I believe it is. Let's give it a go. Reload. And now for authors, I can post. I want my name to be Charlie. Send. Invalid variable name declaration. Probably because I used like a reserved word name or something. Let's do name like that, maybe. Invalid variable name declaration, line 27. What could that be? Let's just try this. Let's go with X and X. This array thing here is kind of throwing me off. Invalid variable name declaration. Well, that is annoying. Insert into author. Let's try maybe that. Bizarre. Well, okay, so this gives me the opportunity to talk about this. So by default, Taffy will, if something goes wrong in your resource, it will return the error as a JSON object, right? So I'm seeing my error message and I get the stack trace and it tells me where it is, right? So it's on, here, let me hide this. It's on author collection, line 27. So it doesn't like that. Oh, does it need to be? I bet it does need to be in quotes. Insert result. I bet you it's trying to show the contents of the insert result variable right there, which is currently empty string. Let's actually prove that theory. ABC 1 2 3. Reload, send. No matching property, generated key found in string. Well, now it's a different error. That's malarkey. I call shenanigans, but whatever. So now reload and send. Hey, finally, ID 7. So it probably was working a bunch of times, but we've created some authors. And actually, if I go back to my GET request, we can see all of them. bunch of Charlies. I'm surrounded by Charlies. Okay, so that was a post. A put. So let's change some of those Charlies to something else. Now in my author member, I'm going to get my author ID from the URL. So let's just change this to author ID, and we're going to get a new name, and we're going to do query execute update author. That might be required, I'm not sure. Set name equals name. Go with relatively safe variable names here. X is going to be type cf sql varchar. Value is going to be arguments.name. All right, so we've updated that, and there's lots of different schools of thought on what you should return in these cases. Some people say return the entire updated record. Some people want you to return just like I'll do here, return no data dot with status. So generally 201 would be inserted, but anything 200 is acceptable as success. I would say learn your status codes and try to use them, but at the end of the day, all that matters is that people understand what's going on. There's no need to go crazy over this stuff. Cool. So let's see if that works. So we're going to reload and refresh. And now I've got my put method working here. So let's start with Charlie number 2. We'll make his name Dan. So we're going to do a put author ID 2. His name is going to be Dan. Send. And I get 200 success. So now if we go back over to authors and send. Oh, I didn't. Yep. Look at that. I didn't have a where clause. Where ID equals ID. I was missing that. ID. That's going to be numeric arguments dot author ID. Egg on my face. So let's change author ID 1 back to Adam. And now we've got a bunch of Dans. So let's change number 3 back to Charlie. And if we go back to authors, now we've got Adam, Dan, Charlie, and a bunch of other Dans, the No Dans Club. All right, so that is, and I guess let's do a delete real quick too, because why not? Author member. So if I were to do my delete method in the author collection, the implication is that this would let me delete all of the authors, right? Because I'm not specifying in the URL which one I want to delete. Generally with a REST API, you're talking about a noun and a verb, right? I want you to give me the collection of all authors. I want you to give me, like, read would be, or get would be kind of our read in create, read, update, delete. I want to read all authors. I want to read one particular author, or I want to delete all authors or delete one particular author. So we're going to do in our author member our delete function. Function delete required numeric author ID, and save a couple of seconds. We're going to copy that, and we're going to do delete from author where ID equals ID. Don't need the X, don't need the comma. Okay, so now let's reload and let's delete numbers 5, 6, and 7. So I need to reload to get my delete visible. So pick delete, and we'll do delete number 5. We can see we got a 200. If I do 6, go to 200 again, and 7. And now if we go over to authors and get them, we've got only 1 through 4. So we are rapidly approaching the end of our hour. That went by really fast for me. I guess now's a good time, I think, to turn it over for questions, if there are any. So, Charlie?
Well, there have been a few along the way, and I think most people have offered answers for you. So let's just say if anybody has a question that's outstanding, that'd be a good time to pop it in.
Wonderful. So while we're waiting for those to come in, because I know there's a slight delay, I'll just reinforce there. So the website for Taffy is taffy.io. And I'm not the only person that has been contributing to this lovely list of people down at the bottom here. These are all links to their GitHub profiles. All of them have contributed to Taffy, and I welcome issues, pull requests, bug reports, all of that. We do have a mailing list, though that now that there's the mailing list predates the CFML Slack. So if you're already on the CFML Slack, there's a Taffy channel there. It's a wonderful place to ask for help or to help others. The mailing list is still active and every now and then gets an email. So taffy.io and then docs.taffy.io is where our updated documentation lives. I firmly believe that we need to keep the documentation for older versions around. So that's what I've got here is all the old version documentations. And one of the things that I try really hard to do is down at the bottom of each of these. So 3.2, I think I missed that one, but in the version that should be coming out soon, there is notes on bug fixes, new features, breaking changes. They're in a 3.2 release. There weren't and shouldn't be breaking changes. But if we go back to, let's look at 3.1. So what's new? So you can see these are the list of bug fixes, new features. So that's always handy. And if you aren't sure what can be used where, sort of thing, all of the methods that are available I didn't talk about it. I should talk about that. So in application CFC, very similar to framework 1, there's a variables framework object, and you can put in a bunch of settings in here, and those are all discussed in the documentation. Things like hiding the dashboard in production, that sort of thing. There's a lot to learn in here. It's a very powerful, but hopefully simple tool to use. There's some methods you can use in application CFC, and there's some methods you can use in your resources. Have we got any questions yet? So Daniel asks, I found your example APIs in GitHub. Have you thought about creating a Taffy CLI command so I can install API templates and in addition, perhaps generate boilerplate code? To answer your question directly, no, I hadn't thought of that. It's an interesting idea, and I would love to discuss it with you maybe on the CFML Slack or in an issue in the GitHub. That'd be a good place to start that. Dan Wilson, whoever that is, asks, would you give your ideas on what a software developer should do when retrofitting APIs into an existing application built before APIs were a thing? Sure. So that actually dovetails I don't know if you did that intentionally or not, Dan, but that is a very perfect use case for Taffy, right? So if you are already a ColdBox developer, I would say you're probably going to be more comfortable using the ColdBox REST module. I think it's called Relax. That will fit nicely with all the other things you're already doing in ColdBox. If you are... I think Mach 2 also has a REST feature. I would say if you're using Mach 2, use their REST thing. But if you're using something else, or if you're using Framework 1, and you need to bolt on, if you've got an old Fusebox app and you need to bolt on an API, Taffy was kind of built with that sort of usage in mind. So as you can see, I've just created this API folder off to the side, and I could have all kinds of other application code in here. That's one of the reasons that Taffy has its own application CFC, so that anything that might be in your application, your front-end user-facing application, anything that's in that application CFC that might slow down or just be completely unnecessary to your REST API, they don't intermingle and they don't get in each other's way. For example, with your user-facing API, you probably have a session, and in a REST API, best practice would be to have sessions turned off so that you don't get the cookie or anything like that. APIs should be stateless. To answer the question, basically you just drop in an API folder, and in there I've got my application.cfc with, in this case, the mappings were necessary. and I needed a data source to be able to talk to the database, and then resources in a resources folder. And the way that works is if we go back to the browser. So I showed you everything here in the dashboard, but I can do it. I could just as easily do like we talked about, going to google.com as a GET request. If I do authors here, oh, make me look bad. This is probably a Tomcat filter thing. Of course, I didn't test it, but there is documentation in the Taffy documentation. docs.taffy.io tells you how to fix this problem. And I just didn't think of it in advance of this presentation. But once you get that problem fixed, if you go to /authors after your index.cfm, can't see my keyboard, can't find that key, authors, then that would be how you would do the same thing as running the GET request for authors here in the dashboard. Your post, your put, your delete, those are not as easy to do through just like the URL bar in the browser. So a tool that I would recommend for testing those is index.cfm. Why can't I type in you? There we go. Index.cfm authors. Localhost 4040 API. Right. So, right, if my application was at localhost 4040, then I get my, the current time is, and this is the dump of the data, and then, right, that was that page that showed up. So if we add API index.cfm, that tells Apache or Nginx or whatever that you're using to pass this request off to ColdFusion or your ColdFusion server of choice. And then it sort of traditionally can parse out stuff after the .cfm. So Taffy takes advantage of that and lets you do this. And then one of the nice things about this, what? Not found. 4040 API index.cfm. I don't know what's going on with that. That is, you know what? That is probably also the that same Lucy thing. So what's actually going on under the hood is that gets translated to endpoint URL param equal /authors. And now I'm getting my the dashboard. I don't know. It's weird. There is a little bit of setup to do. The documentation walks you through it. But yeah, basically just drop in an API folder. I will say also, worth mentioning, on certain versions, especially of Adobe ColdFusion, that API folder is, for lack of a better word, like a reserved word. And you have to comment out one of the built-in servlet filters. So Adobe ColdFusion comes with a REST functionality built in, and it sort of assumes it can operate at that /API URL. And if you would like to use Taffy or anything else at that /API URL, you have to turn off that servlet filter. Hopefully that answers your question, whoever you are, Dan Wilson. Several of my applications have very complex query structure. It seems easier to just program the queries instead of making models. So, Joseph, something I didn't have time to demo here is Taffy works very well with either Cold Spring or DI1 if you're using either of those for, what is it called, dependency injection and inversion of control, like a bean library basically. Then you can integrate that right into your Taffy API. And if you have services with methods that you want to call and they return some useful data, then you can do that and return those things from your API responses as well. That's an answer. That looks like an answer. Okay, cool. I did, I think, promise that if you guys hung around to the end, I would give you a discount code for my book. And that discount code is CF Meetup, easily enough. So if you go to restassuredbook.com and you scroll down a little bit and click the button to buy it, and then discount code here, CF Meetup. that lowers the price by 15%. So my way of saying thank you for attending. Any other questions before we wrap it up?
Well, while we wait to hear one of those, let me also get you to clarify for folks. You'd been doing some work in recent weeks and months, like you were creating some videos, right? Have those started to be posted?
No, not yet. So there is a plan to add some video content to the book, right? That's what you're referring to?
Right.
Yeah.
And then I was going to ask about you're planning to update the book as well.
I am. Yeah. So the book is actually on version 2.1. I guess it's safe to mention or fair to mention, anytime that the book gets updated, I send the updated copies to everybody that's purchased it in the past. So like I said, it's on version 2.1 now, and I'm rapidly approaching a time where I'm going to do another release. And also, so many balls in the air here. I'm trying to set it up so that I have a print edition as well. I'd love to have a copy on my bookshelf back there, or send 10 copies. And I'm sure my mom would love to have a copy that she can show off to her friends. And I've heard some people request the book as well in a print edition. So I figured if I can make it happen, that would be wonderful. And if anybody buys the digital edition and then later wants to buy the print edition after that comes out, just let me know, and I will hook you up with a discount code that gets you as much off as I can possibly manage. It does cost money to print them, but aside from that, and as Charlie alluded to, one of the things that I've been trying to get through, and one of the reasons that I have like this lovely microphone set up here, is to record basically most of the same content from the book as like a video tutorial series. So I know that some people prefer to read a book, some people prefer to watch a video tutorial. So trying to offer the same knowledge in multiple ways.
That would be awesome. And there was a question there right at 5:59, according to the times entered on mine. It says from Stuart McGuire, have you thought about adding Wirebox support?
Oh, you know what? I have to feel like, or I do feel like that has come up in the past. It might already be supported. Let's see. Taffy. I'm just going to look through the issues. Wirebox. It looks like it's under review. It came up in 2012. So that was I guess that was the reasoning I had at the time. Wireboxes, if anybody is using Wirebox, they're probably using ColdBox, and so Relax is probably the better choice. If it's something that people are passionate about, I'd love to see it added. I'm not the only person that can commit code here. There's a couple of other people that are committers on the repository, and I participate as well. But everybody's welcome, and it's certainly open for discussion, and we're willing to consider it.
By the way, you can see Stuart there has the last comment there from 9 days ago.
So, look at that.
He's representing. And he's using it with Fusebox, as he notes there. So
yep,
that's going to make it a smaller audience of potential people. But if there's other needs for it, then others maybe want to contribute. I was thinking maybe we'd see somebody jump in and say they'd already been working on it, but we have not.
Stuart, you're welcome to.
There you go. You know what they say when you ask questions. You volunteered.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, it doesn't seem like there's any other questions that are outstanding that anybody's asked recently that haven't been answered. So I guess we'll go ahead and call it in there. Don't use ColdBox. Right. We said, sorry, if I said ColdBox, I meant to say Fusebox. But anyway, so thank you for that clarification, Stuart.
Mm-hmm. I see somebody says that Taffy was added to ForgeBox, and I'll just point out that I had nothing to do with that. Somebody contributed that as a pull request, and now it's available.
So thanks to whoever did that.
Yeah.
And maybe by the way, let's suggest to Stuart that you might want to look into ForgeBox, find the work that someone did for Taffy there, and reach out to that person and ask them about maybe wanting to take up Wirebox integration.
So ForgeBox is, if I remember correctly, it's like their sort of version of NPM, so you can install resources through it. So it's not exactly the same thing as adding support for Wirebox. Is like a
no, but actually, whoever would have taken that up might be the sort of person that would also be involved in integrating things, perhaps even with Wirebox. I just said there's a
Yeah,
better chance
totally
of that
fair.
than others randomly out there. So
Yeah.
just that thought to Stuart to give it a try. Yes. So as Dan says, thank you very much. And we won't keep you much longer. If you have a follow-on that you think you might want to do, just let us know. We'll be glad to have you on.
Yeah, I'm sort of background processing another topic, very related and kind of middle ground between. Well, I would say maybe even more introductory. Like, why would you want to bother doing REST at all? So
there's an audience for that for sure. And that'll be probably something that you would make into one of your videos ultimately. But if you want to try stuff out with us, let us be the guinea pig for your first presentation of it. Feel free.
Sure.
Yeah, happy to have you. All right, sir. Well, I'll let you get on to your evening. Thanks everybody for coming on, and we'll get news out for the next event shortly.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. Talk to you later.